The boarding pass crumpled in Marcus's small hand, his knuckles whitening as the airline agent's words hit like a slap. "Sorry, kid. You don't belong in first class." At 12 years old, Marcus had already learned the world could be cruel, but this was a new kind of sting. The Atlanta airport buzzed with the chaos of holiday travel, a kaleidoscope of hurried footsteps and rolling suitcases. Marcus stood frozen at the gate, his sneakers rooted to the polished floor, his eyes darting to his father, James, who stood beside him. James's jaw tightened, his calm demeanor cracking just enough to reveal the storm brewing beneath. The agent, a wiry man with a name tag reading Greg, smirked, his voice dripping with condescension. "Policy, sir. We're overbooked. First class is reserved for priority passengers." Marcus felt his cheeks burn. He wasn't stupid, knew what priority meant. It wasn't about the ticket clutched in his hand, the one his dad had saved for months to buy. It was about the color of his skin. The other passengers, mostly white, shuffled past, their first-class boarding passes flashing as they breezed toward the jetway. Marcus's eyes stung, but he refused to cry. Not here. Not in front of Greg. James placed a hand on Marcus's shoulder, his touch steady but heavy with unspoken rage. "Stay calm, son," he whispered, though his voice trembled with restraint. "We'll handle this." But Marcus saw the fire in his father's eyes, the kind that didn't flare but smoldered, patient and dangerous. James wasn't just any dad. A former software engineer turned entrepreneur, he'd built a tech empire from nothing, clawing his way up in a world that rarely gave black men a seat at the table. This wasn't just an insult to his son, it was a declaration of war. "Sir, you need to step aside," Greg said, his tone sharper now, as if James's silence was an affront. "Economy's that way." He pointed toward the back of the plane, his smirk widening. A few passengers glanced over, their curiosity tinged with discomfort. Marcus felt their stares like needles, each one pricking at his pride. He wanted to shout, to tell them he belonged just as much as they did. But his voice caught in his throat, trapped by the weight of being the only black kid at the gate. James didn't move. He pulled out his phone, his fingers steady as he typed something Marcus couldn't see. "Greg," James said, his voice low and deliberate, reading the name tag like a judge pronouncing a sentence. "You're sure about this? You're sure you want to deny my son his seat?" Greg scoffed, crossing his arms. "Look, I don't make the rules. I just enforce them. If you've got a problem, take it up with corporate." His eyes flicked to Marcus, then back to James, as if daring them to push back. The tension crackled like static, the air between them thick with unspoken accusations. Marcus's heart pounded. He'd seen his dad negotiate million-dollar deals with a smile, but this was different. This was personal. "Corporate," James repeated, his voice eerily calm. He slipped his phone back into his pocket and leaned closer to Greg, just enough to make the agent flinch. "I'll do better than that." The line behind them grew restless, murmurs rippling through the crowd. A woman in a red coat whispered to her husband, "What's the holdup?" A businessman in a suit checked his watch, sighing loudly. Marcus wanted to disappear, to shrink into the floor and escape the humiliation. But James didn't budge. He stood tall, his tailored jacket and quiet confidence a stark contrast to Greg's cheap polyester vest and smug grin. "Dad," Marcus whispered, tugging at his sleeve, "let's just go. It's not worth it." But even as he said it, he knew it was a lie. It was worth it. Every second of this fight was worth it because letting it slide meant letting the world win. James knelt down, eye level with his son. "Marcus, listen to me," he said, his voice soft but fierce. "You're not just worth a seat. You're worth the whole damn plane. Don't ever let anyone tell you different." His words were a lifeline, pulling Marcus back from the edge of shame. He nodded, swallowing hard, his trust in his dad outweighing the sting of Greg's words. James stood and turned back to Greg. "You're making a mistake," he said. His tone so measured it sent a chill through Marcus. "But I'll let you figure that out the hard way." Greg rolled his eyes. "Whatever, man. Move along or I'll call security." He waved a hand dismissively, already turning to the next passenger. But James didn't move. He just stood there, his gaze locked on Greg, a predator sizing up prey. Marcus had seen that look before when James outmaneuvered competitors, when he turned impossible odds into victories. It was the look of a man who didn't lose. The gate area felt like a pressure cooker, the tension building with every second. Marcus's stomach churned, but he held his head high, mirroring his dad's defiance. He didn't understand what James was planning, but he knew one thing. His dad never made empty promises. 2 hours earlier, James had been on a call with his lawyer, finalizing a deal no one at this gate could have imagined. For months, he'd been quietly acquiring shares of Horizon Airlines, the very company now humiliating his son. It started as a business move. Horizon was struggling, its stock plummeting after a string of PR disasters. James saw an opportunity not just for profit but for power. By the time he and Marcus arrived at the airport, the deal was nearly done. One phone call, one signature, and Horizon would be his. But James hadn't planned to reveal it like this. Not until Greg's smug face and casual racism turned a routine flight into a battlefield. Now, the stakes were personal. This wasn't just about a seat, it was about every door slammed in their faces. Every "you don't belong" they'd ever heard. James had spent his life proving the world wrong, and he'd be damned if his son grew up thinking he had to accept less. "Security!" Greg barked, his patience gone. 2 uniformed officers approached, their hands resting on their radios. The crowd parted, some filming on their phones, others whispering. Marcus's heart sank. This was spiraling, and he didn't know how it would end. But James didn't flinch. He pulled out his phone again, dialed a number, and spoke in a tone so calm it was almost terrifying. "Claire," he said, addressing his lawyer. "Finalize it. Now." He hung up, his eyes never leaving Greg's. The agent's smirk faltered, just for a second, as if he sensed something shifting beneath his feet. The officers reached the gate, their expressions neutral but wary. "Sir, we need you to step aside," one said, glancing between James and Greg. The crowd was fully invested now, a mix of sympathy and schadenfreude in their eyes. Marcus felt exposed, like a spotlight was burning through him. But he stood closer to his dad, drawing strength from his unyielding calm. "I'll step aside," James said, raising his hands slightly. "But first, Greg, check your email." His voice was a blade, sharp and precise. Greg frowned, clearly thrown, but he pulled out his phone with a scoff. Whatever he saw on the screen made his face go pale, the smirk vanishing like smoke. "What the hell is this?" Greg muttered, his voice barely audible. He looked up at James, then back at his phone, his hands trembling. Marcus didn't know what was happening, but he felt the shift, like the air before a storm breaks. The officers exchanged glances, unsure who to side with now. James leaned in, his voice low but carrying the weight of a gavel. "That, Greg, is a notice from Horizon's new owner. Me." He paused, letting the words sink in. "You just denied my son a seat on my airline." The gate fell silent, the crowd's murmurs dying instantly. Greg's mouth opened, but no words came out. Marcus's eyes widened, his heart racing as he processed his dad's words. His airline, his dad owned Horizon? The revelation hit him like a wave, pride and disbelief crashing together. James turned to the officers. "We're boarding now. First class. Both of us." His tone left no room for argument. The officers hesitated, then stepped back, clearly out of their depth. Greg stood frozen, his phone still in his hand, the email's glow reflecting his shock. Marcus clutched his boarding pass tighter, his earlier shame replaced by a flicker of triumph. He looked at his dad, who gave him a small nod, the kind that said, "We're not done yet." As they walked toward the jetway, the crowd parted, some clapping softly, others staring in awe. Marcus felt taller, stronger, like he could take on the world with his dad by his side. But this was only the beginning. Owning an airline didn't erase the sting of what had happened. It didn't undo the years of slights, the microaggressions, the systemic barriers that had shaped their lives. James knew that, and so did Marcus. As they settled into their first-class seats, the weight of the moment lingered. This wasn't just about winning a fight, it was about rewriting the rules. The plane taxied down the runway, and Marcus stared out the window, the Atlanta skyline shrinking below. He thought about Greg, about the look on his face when the email came through. He thought about the other passengers, some of whom had stayed silent, complicit in their inaction. And he thought about his dad, who'd turned a moment of humiliation into a masterstroke of justice. "Dad," Marcus said, his voice quiet but steady. "What happens now?" James looked at him, his eyes softening but still fierce. "Now we change things. Not just for us, but for everyone who's ever been told they don't belong." Marcus nodded, a spark igniting in his chest. This wasn't the end of their fight, it was the start of something bigger. Something that would shake the foundations of every gate, every boardroom, every system that dared to count them out. As the plane climbed into the sky, Marcus felt the hum of the engines vibrating through his seat, a reminder that they were moving forward literally and figuratively. The first-class cabin was quiet, save for the soft clink of glasses and the murmur of flight attendants. The other passengers stole glances at him and James, their curiosity palpable but restrained. Marcus didn't care. For the first time in hours, he felt like he could breathe. James leaned back in his seat, his face unreadable but his eyes alive with purpose. Marcus knew that look. It was the same one his dad had when he'd taught him to code at 8, or when he'd stayed up late strategizing for his company's next big move. It was the look of a man who saw obstacles as opportunities, who turned no into "watch me." "Dad," Marcus said, breaking the silence. "How'd you do it? The airline, how'd you buy it?" James chuckled, a low, warm sound that eased the tension in Marcus's chest. "It wasn't easy, son. Took months of work, calls at 3 a.m., and a lot of favors. Horizon was bleeding money, bad management, worse PR. I saw a chance to step in." He paused, his gaze drifting to the window. "But today, that wasn't the plan. I didn't want to play that card in front of a crowd. But when that guy Greg looked at you like you were nothing." He shook his head, his voice tightening. "I couldn't let it slide." Marcus nodded, his mind racing. He'd always known his dad was successful, but this was different. This was power on a scale he hadn't imagined. Yet, even with all that power, they'd still faced Greg's smug dismissal, the casual cruelty of a system that didn't care about their worth. It made Marcus wonder. If his dad hadn't owned the airline, what would have happened? Would they have been shuffled to economy, their dignity left at the gate? The flight attendant approached, her smile professional but cautious. "Can I get you gentlemen anything?" she asked, her eyes lingering on James as if trying to place him. Marcus caught the shift in her demeanor, polite, but with a hint of deference she hadn't shown the other passengers. Word must have spread from the gate. "Water for me," James said. And a ginger ale for my son. As she walked away, Marcus leaned closer. Dad, what happens to Greg now? James's expression hardened, but only for a moment. He'll face consequences. Not just him, Horizon's policies, too. I'm not here to fire people for sport, Marcus. But I'm not running a company that lets this kind of thing slide. We're going to clean house. Marcus felt a surge of pride, but also a flicker of unease. Cleaning house sounded good, but what did it mean for the bigger picture? Would firing Greg fix the problem? Or was it just a bandage on a deeper wound? He didn't voice the thought, but it lingered, heavy as the clouds outside. The flight landed in Chicago, where James had a meeting with Horizon's board. Marcus knew it wasn't just a meeting, it was a reckoning. As they disembarked, the other passengers parted like a sea, their whispers following them through the terminal. Marcus held his head high, his dad's words echoing in his mind. You're worth the whole damn plane. The next few days were a whirlwind. James took Marcus to Horizon's headquarters, a sleek glass building that felt both imposing and surreal. Marcus sat in on meetings, watching his dad command rooms of executives who squirmed under his gaze. James didn't raise his voice, didn't need to. His presence was enough, a black man in a tailored suit, owning the room in every sense. Marcus saw the way people reacted, some with respect, others with barely concealed resentment. It was a crash course in power dynamics, and Marcus soaked it up, his notebook filled with scribbled observations. But the real work began when James announced his first move as Horizon's owner, a top-down review of the company's policies, starting with its treatment of passengers. He hired a team of consultants experts in diversity, equity, and inclusion to audit every process, from hiring to boarding. Marcus overheard one executive grumble. This is overkill. It was one incident. James's response was swift and cutting. One incident too many, and I'm betting it wasn't the first. Marcus couldn't shake the memory of Greg's face, the way his smugness had crumbled. Part of him wanted to gloat, to see Greg humiliated the way he'd been. But another part, a quieter, more uncertain part, wondered if Greg was just a symptom of something bigger. He asked his dad about it one night, as they sat in their hotel room overlooking Lake Michigan. Dad, do you think Greg's the only one? Or is it everyone? James set down his laptop, his expression softening. It's not everyone, Marcus, but it's enough. People like Greg, they don't act alone. They're enabled by systems, by silence, by people who look the other way. That's what we're fighting. Not just one guy at a gate. Marcus nodded, but the weight of it settled on him. Changing a system sounded bigger than buying an airline. It sounded impossible. Yet, watching his dad work relentless, strategic, unafraid made him believe it could happen. The story of the airport incident spread like wildfire. Social media lit up with hashtags. Horizon Gate, Justice for Marcus. Some praised James as a hero, a black man who'd turned the tables on racism. Others called it a stunt, accusing him of buying the airline just to flex his wealth. The truth, Marcus knew, was somewhere in between. His dad hadn't bought Horizon to make a point, done it for business. But when the moment came, he'd used it to send a message. The backlash wasn't gentle. Pundits on cable news debated whether James's actions were excessive. Anonymous accounts on X posted vitriol, calling him entitled, a race baiter, or worse. Marcus saw the comments on his dad's phone one night, his stomach twisting at the hatred. Why do they care so much? He asked. James sighed, rubbing his temples. Because change scares them, Marcus. When you challenge the way things are, people get defensive. They don't want to face their own complicity. Marcus thought about the passengers at the gate, the ones who'd watched in silence as Greg humiliated him. Were they complicit, too? Or were they just caught in the moment, unsure what to do. He didn't have an answer, but the question gnawed at him. A week after the incident, James held a press conference. Marcus stood backstage, watching his dad face a sea of cameras. Horizon Airlines will be a company that values every passenger, every employee, regardless of who they are, James said, his voice steady but fierce. What happened to my son will not happen again. Not on my watch. The crowd erupted in questions, some supportive, others skeptical. One reporter asked, "Mr. Carter, do you think this incident reflects systemic racism in the airline industry?" Marcus held his breath, waiting for his dad's response. James didn't hesitate. It reflects systemic racism in the world. The airline industry's just a mirror. But mirrors can be cleaned, and that's what we're doing. Marcus felt a swell of pride, but also a pang of fear. His dad was taking on something massive, something that could consume them both. Yet, as the press conference ended and James pulled him into a hug, Marcus felt ready to face it too. Over the next month, Horizon began to change. New training programs rolled out, emphasizing respect and accountability. Greg was fired, not with fanfare but quietly, his termination letter citing conduct unbecoming. James didn't stop there. He met with community leaders, listened to stories of discrimination, and invited them to help shape Horizon's future. Marcus sat in on those meetings, too, learning that change wasn't just about power, it was about listening. One day, Marcus found a letter slipped under their hotel door. It was handwritten, anonymous, from a former Horizon employee. "I saw what happened to your son," it read. "I'm sorry I didn't speak up. I've seen it before and I stayed quiet. Not anymore." The letter shook Marcus. It wasn't an apology, it was a promise. He showed it to his dad, who read it silently, then nodded. "This is why we do it," James said. "Not for revenge. For them." As Horizon's transformation gained traction, so did the scrutiny. Competitors spread rumors, claiming James was running the company into the ground. Stock prices dipped, and some employees resisted the changes, grumbling about woke policies. But James didn't waver. He brought Marcus to board meetings, showing him how to navigate the pushback, how to stay focused on the goal. One night, as they walked through Chicago's streets, Marcus asked the question that had been burning in him. "Dad, what if it's not enough? What if we can't change everything?" James stopped, looking at his son under the glow of a streetlight. "We won't change everything, Marcus. Not in one lifetime. But we'll change something. And that's enough to start." Marcus carried those words with him, a beacon in the storm. He thought about the gate, about Greg's smirk, about the passengers who'd watched in silence. He thought about the letter, the promise of change, however small. And he realized that this their fight wasn't just about them. It was about every kid who'd been told they didn't belong, every person who'd been pushed to the back of the line. The plane incident wasn't the end. It was the spark. Horizon Airlines became a symbol, not just of one man's triumph, but of what was possible when someone refused to accept injustice. Marcus knew the road ahead would be long, fraught with more Gregs, more silent crowds, more systems to dismantle. But he also knew he wasn't alone. His dad had shown him that, as they boarded another flight first class, no questions asked, Marcus looked out at the tarmac, the world stretching endlessly before them. He wasn't just a kid anymore. He was part of something bigger, something worth fighting for. So what do you think? Was James's response justice, or was it revenge? Where do you draw the line, and how do we fix a world that keeps drawing it for us?